Maine is a state of legends. For fly fishers, three of the most mythical stories revolve around the origins of the gray ghost, the Grand Lake streamer, and the 9-3. All three of these flies play an important role in the evolution of fly fishing in Maine. Master fly tyer and fisherman Bill Thompson will not only show you how to tie these time-proven flies, he will also go on location to share with you the unique history of each fly. Bill's first stop is Upper Dam in the wilds of the Rangeley Lakes Region. This was the home of one of Maine's most famous tyers, Carrie Steven.
In fly fishing, we often think of our sport as a religious experience, and we talk of the rivers that we fish in as being holy water. I'm Bill Thompson, and I'm standing in one of the most famous rivers in the state of Maine. This is the famous Upper Dam in the Rangeley region. Not only is this great fishing water, but this is also rich in legend and in lore. This is where Carrie Stevens first cast the famous gray ghost fly. Why don't you take a walk with me, and we'll go up and we'll look at the house where Carrie Stevens first tied the gray ghost pattern. In 1924, in this house, Carrie Stevens first sat down and tied the famous gray ghost streamer. The gray ghost is probably the most famous fly pattern ever created in the state of Maine. It has been used successfully all over the world in both fresh and salt water. Mrs. Stevens was a self-taught tyer and created many unique ways of dressing her flies. Thousands of tyers have tied the gray ghost on thousands of different occasions, and no one has ever exactly duplicated the methods that she used. We're going back to the den now, and we're going to try to recreate a gray ghost pattern in the way Mrs. Stevens would have in 1924. Well, welcome back to the den. Now we're going to actually sit down and we're going to tie up a gray ghost the way Carrie Stevens would have done. I'm holding in my hand here a gray ghost pattern tied in the Carrie Stevens methods. What we've got, of course, is the traditional gray saddle hackle wings and the silver pheasant here for the cheeks, and the jungle cock for the eyes, and the yellow, gold yellow body, little peacock curl, and some white bucktail. This, of course, is the traditional way to tie the fly. What we have here on the desk are some other flies that are corruptions of the original pattern. This particular one uses red silk for the body, and of course this is called a red gray ghost. A lot of times tyers will tie the fly as a tandem fly. And we have a tandem. And a lot of tyers that use the tandem method will often string beads between the connecting wire, in this case red. Silver makes an attractive color. The fly's name has been changed hundreds of times as well, and it generally reflects the color of the wing that's used. In this case we have a green ghost. Tyers have also used pink, brown, and red. Any saddle hackle color that's available probably has been used at one time or another. This last fly here is an updated or modernized version. It's tied for salt water, and of course we've used a stainless steel hook. We've used artificial bucktail here, and most notably the eye has been changed to the stick-on variety. Before you start to tie a gray ghost, you are going to have to make a trip to the local fly shop, and you're going to have to assemble the various bird parts that you're going to need to tie the fly. And we have these parts laid out here in front of us. We're going to need some white bucktail. We're going to need a golden pheasant crest. Got the whole bird here, but actually all you're going to really need is just the crest part here. We're going to need some peacock curl. We're going to need, very important of course, would be the wing and some gray saddle hackle. You're going to need some silver pheasant body feathers, this section right in here, the silver pheasant. Again, you don't need the whole bird. You can buy the parts separately. And the last thing here is the jungle cock, which creates the eyes for the fly. Now, this is optional. You can leave the jungle cock out, and you can still tie a very attractive fly without going to all of the expense. Jungle cock, of course, is very, very expensive, and the reason why is that it is listed as an endangered species. Now, before anybody thinks that we've violated all kinds of fish and game laws here, we haven't. This particular cape was raised domestically for the fly tying trade, and they are available, quite readily available these days, to fly tyers. Well, the next thing that we're going to need is the hook itself. And this particular hook is called the Carrie Stevens hook, and it's put out by the Partridge Company of England. Needless to say, the hooks that Carrie would have used are no longer available to us. And what Partridge has done is they've duplicated or approximated the type of hook that she would have used in her tying. It features a big turned back eye and, of course, the long shank that makes a nice trolling fly. Now, the first thing we're going to do is get our hook secured here in the vise, which brings up an interesting point. Carrie Stevens never used a vise in her fly tying. She continued to do it the old-fashioned way, and she always held the hook in her hands while she tied the fly. A lot of her friends gave her vices, but she always shunned the vise and continued up until the time that she finally quit tying with the hook in her fingers. Well, we're going to secure some thread wraps onto the hook now, and you'll notice that we're using a white colored thread. In this case, it's actually a single floss, a single thread floss. Get that cut there. And there's good reason for this, is because when we start to tie the body, we're going to use a light colored floss or a light silk. And if we had used the same color as the head, which in this case is black, obviously when the fly was in the water and it was wet, that dark thread would show through and it would change the color of the body of the fly. And this is something that Carrie always did. She always prepared the bodies in advance, and she always used a white thread for her thread wraps. And we're going to bring this right down here, about to the bend of the hook, and we're going to end up with our thread just about where the point is. Now, the next material that we're going to tie in here is going to be the tinsel. And we're going to cut ourselves off here. Nice long piece so we don't have a problem with not having enough material. Now, naturally, Carrie would have used real tinsel, the old-fashioned tinsel, and what we've substituted here is the mylar. There are on the market now some French tinsels, which are very good, and you might want to use those if you want to be a little more authentic. However, I feel that the mylar has a number of advantages. Basically, it never tarnishes, and it's a very rugged material. And so we're going to begin here by tying in a tag. Now, I personally think that Carrie modified her fly over the years. I don't think that probably the very, very original one that she used to catch the large brook trout at Upper Dan probably was all this fancy. A lot of people have said that Carrie never saw anybody tie a fly. I'm not meaning to debunk the legend of Carrie Stevens, but I find that very hard to believe. She traveled in the company of a great many fly fishermen, and a lot of those fishermen obviously would have tied flies. In fact, the materials that she originally used were given to her by a friend. So I feel that very strongly that she probably did see some people tie some flies. Now, it's true, she developed her own methods and were totally independent of anything that was being done of the day. So we're really not debunking the legend here at all. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in the floss that forms the body. And herein lies kind of a controversy among fly tyers. What is the actual color that Carrie Steven used for the Gray Ghost? Generally speaking, if you look up the patents in any of the fly books, they will generally call for the burnt orange floss. Now, there are those who have studied and have seen Carrie Steven's flies, and they will tell you that's not true, that what she actually used was the golden color here, the golden yellow. And their argument is, of course, that this pretty much matches the golden pheasant crest that she used for the throat and as part of the wing. So I guess that's probably what we're going to do, is we're going to go along with that. I'm going to let you be the ultimate judge. To be honest, I have seen flies that have utilized both silk. So I think that this will end the controversy here as far as we're concerned is that probably both types of silk we used. And we're going to make sure that we get a long enough piece here so that we don't run out of floss halfway up the shank of the hook. And what I like to do is I like to flatten that out a little bit. I like to get a loose loop here when I tie it in so that the floss actually ends up on the underside of the hook shank. And what this does is it eliminates that unsightly little bump that invariably shows up at the end of your fly. So we're really trying to camouflage that. Now you can see I'm overwrapping the shank of the hook one more time with the white floss. And that, of course, is going to make this very appealing when we put on the yellow floss, and it will not turn dark when it's in the water. It's a little time consuming here. You'll note that we left an awful lot of room here at the beginning of the fly. I'll just put that off about there. And you'll note that there's quite a bit of room here between the actual eye and where we've tied the thread off, which is where we're going to end the floss. And this is a technique that Carrie used. She left a lot of room here to tie in her head and tie in the wing material, as well as the cheeks and the underbody. So now we're going to add the floss. Pull that tinsel down there a little bit. I like to get one wrap of floss, or possibly two, behind the point where the tinsel is wrapped forward. So we're going to get a couple of wraps there. There we go. Now we can kind of get that out of our way. Hook it back there in the material keeper. And now we can start wrapping this forward. Now silk and floss in general is fairly fragile material, and it tends to fray. So you want to try to keep as much as you can your fingers off of the material that you're using, which isn't easy, especially when you're tying on a long shanked hook like this. And you want to make sure that you're getting nice even wraps so you get a nice smooth body. Handling most of the flosses will actually dull the color, so you want to be very careful. One trick that you can actually use white gloves if you really want to be exceptionally careful and you're tying these flies for presentation or to be framed or what have you. It's a little easier when we get up to the front here. Okay, now we can tie that off with our floss thread. Hold that out of the way and cut out this extra. Put that in the trash pile. Now we're ready to spiral the tinsel forward. And you want to make sure, in the mylar, of course, one side is gold and one side is silver. So you want to make sure that the silver side remains up. Now an interesting thing about adding the tinsel. Most fly tyers, and myself included, the tinsel is always wrapped forward in the method that I'm showing you here. If you ever come across an authentic Carrie Stevens fly, she wrapped the tinsel in backwards or overhand, which made the little barber pole spirals, if you will, go in the opposite direction. That's one way that you can tell an authentic Carrie Stevens fly. Tie that off and cut off the extra. A couple of extra wraps so that's nice in there. Okay. And there we have the tag, the golden yellow floss body, and the silver tinsel wrapped forward, which gives a little flash to our fly. Now we're going to put a belly on here of white bucktail. We're going to need the white bucktail now. The best bucktail is generally found at the tip of the tail. That's usually the softest and the most supple. We're going to get a little bit. And you want to be very careful when doing this, because we don't want to get too much material. This should be fairly sparse. Now, needless to say, Carrie Stevens would not have had a hair stacker. However, I like to use the stacker. Just tap that down a little bit. Even out those hairs. There. We can hold it up and we can get rid of the short ones. And we can even thin it out a little bit. If you're using a large amount of hair, what happens is it tends to turn your fly upside down when it gets in the water. It'll go belly up, so to speak, in which case you're presenting a dead bait fish imitation. Get rid of some of those unruly ones there. Some of those shorter ones. I'm going to measure that out on our fly. And we want the bucktail to just come past the bend of the fly. And we can put that right in there. And we can use the pinch method. We can bring up the thread. Get a hold of it. We want to make sure that it's centered. A few wraps. And take the bodkin here and kind of divide it so that it comes on both sides of the hook. And we've got a few more wraps on here. I want that thread torque to bend it over one way or the other. Okay, and then the butt ends we can cut out. Making sure that we don't cut our thread off. Wrap forward and make this a clean wrap. There we go, we have the belly on the fly. Okay. Something else that Carrie did in her flies is she added a nice clump of hackle fibers here underneath the throat to build up the fly a little bit. This is a good place to use those pieces of saddle hackle that really don't mean a lot. This one's been cut off and came in the package, so this is a good way to get rid of that material. Add that in there a little bit. Pop that in there. Might want to do that again. Good, but we want to thicken it up a little bit. Even that out. Okay. Get that in there. And we can cut out the butt sections. And wrap that all in nice and neat. And this is a good point right now to change the thread. So I'm going to use the whip finisher, something else that probably Carrie would not have had. But we'll get a few turns there, cut that off, cut out the white thread. Now I've already got a bobbin prepared, so I've got the black thread all ready to go. And one thing about streamer flies is they look nice or nicer if you're come up with a very small head at the end. So I like to use the 8/0 threads that are on the market today. And they're very, very strong. They're as strong as a conventional 6/0 thread, but they don't build up quite as thick as if you were using the 6/0s. So there you have the 8/0 and the uni thread. Okay, now the next thing that Carrie did was add a little beard or a throat with a small golden pheasant crest, curving upward. And we'll pop one out of here if we can get a good one. Yeah, just a little long there, let's see. Here we go. You usually end up getting a couple of those off when you do it. Let's look at these. Doesn't look too bad. And we can pull back this soft fibers here. Just tear them off. Okay, it doesn't look too bad. Looks about right. And you can put a little kink in them there with your fingernail. Moisten them a little bit. And set that right down on the bottom. I like to stick the stem up through the eye there. It kind of holds them in place. That looks about right. It wants to be about the same length as those hackle fibers that you put in there. Get a few turns on that. There we go. Smooth that out a little bit. Get some unruly ones, you can always cut them off. There we go. And you can push the stem back out a little bit. Trim that off. Wrap those all in nice and neat. And come back here, and there's the bottom part of our fly. A couple more unruly ones. There. And there you go. We can turn that over so you can get a nice look at it. Crust. Okay. Alright, now we're going to need some peacock curl. We've got an abundance of that. And you need about 4 or 5 nice long strands. That looks about right. I don't like to get too fancy here, but I want them to be fairly even. And I'm going to tie these on top. It's a little unruly there. Okay, and the peacock curl should come out about the same length as our bucktail at the end of the fly. And measure that out. It doesn't look too bad. And come up here and use our pinch method again. Get a few good wraps. Cut out the butt ends. And there we go. We have the peacock curl. Occasionally you'll see a gray ghost and they've added the peacock curl on the underside of the hook. I'm not really sure where that came from, but it does make an attractive fly. But again, you have to be concerned about that fly with all the extra stuff on the bottom. What happens when it's in the water? Sometimes it'll just turn right over belly up. Okay. Now we're going to need another golden pheasant crest, and this time we're going to need a much longer one. And so we'll look through what we get here on the crest. And that looks like a pretty good one. Pull that out of there. That doesn't look too bad. We'll take another one out just to be sure. There's a nice long one, I think. that bird. Oh yeah, there's a nice one right there. Oh yeah. This part back here doesn't do much for us. So we're going to tear that right off of there. And we're going to lay that right on there like that. And nice even turn so we don't end up twisting that over with the thread to it. Cut out the butt section. Tie that all in nice and neat. And again, remember that 8/0 thread. See how I'm putting a lot of wraps on here, but I'm not really building up the size of my head. And there we go. Okay, now we're ready to do the wing parts. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to move this vise right out of the way so that we can look at the wing. And we need some gray hackle. Right? You can buy it on the body, or you can buy it strung here. You can often refer to this kind of like buying drugs. You know, you buy this by the ounce. It's a terrible reference there, but I'm looking for saddle hackle here that's going to be long enough. And you want to make sure that the ends aren't too narrow or that they've been chipped up or beaten up by the bird. So there's a couple of good pieces that we've pulled out there. I'm going to need a total of 4 saddle hackles to form these wings. And the fluffy stuff down here on the bottom is something we don't need, so we're going to get rid of that. And we're going to take the scissors and just leave ourselves with a nice clean stem here. Do that one more time. And just the fluffy stuff, it's no good. Take that right out of there. And clip off the butt. Okay. Now we have a couple of pieces that might be suitable for wings. And I've laid out a couple of pieces here in advance. What Carrie Stevens did was that she constructed her wings in advance, and she glued the pieces together. And we have a piece that's already been measured off here and ready to go. The stems have been stripped and they've been measured against the hook to give us the right length. So we're going to glue them together. Carrie Stevens, of course, did not have access to all of the fly tying materials and that are available to us today, and she did secured a lot of her materials from the millinery industry, which of course is hat making. And a lot of ladies in her time made their own hats. It was not too unusual. I remember even my own grandmother made her own hats, and that wasn't all that long ago. So she purchased most of her feathers from the millinery sources, and a lot of her other materials came from the 5 and dime. And she probably used good old nail polish for most of her construction and most of her flies, the heads, and her glues. But what we're going to use a up-to-date, a little modern version here to glue our pieces together. We're going to use Dave's Fleximent. And we're just going to match those two sides up for our wing. A little dab with the Fleximent. Put that right on there on both sides. You don't want to make a big mess here, but just a little bit. And then we can just set that aside to dry. And we can do the other side of the wing construction. Same thing, just a little bit of glue. And that should hold those together very nicely. We'll set that aside and let that dry. Okay. Put the top back on the glue. glue here so we don't have any messes on the bench. I'm going to bring the vise back with the hook still in it, and we're going to measure off. We've already pre-taken these from the bird, but these are our silver pheasant cheeks, and we're going to measure that off on the body of the fly here that we have already have in the vise. A lot of people who tie gray ghosts make a mistake, and they actually tie these cheeks way too big. You only want to go about 1/3 of the length of the fly. So this one actually could be cut back a little bit. So we'll just peel back that. Underside. Try that again. That's about right. Looks good. So now we want to do one more because we got two sides here. When you pick out the material that you're going to use for the cheeks, you want to make sure that you use the well-marked body feathers. A lot of times, some of the others will be very lightly marked or very faintly marked. And what you want to select are the ones that have the nice dark bands. So let's see, we'll put that up there. This one, oh, it's way too big. Probably drop off about 1/4 inch on that one. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. And we can measure that with the one that we're going to use for the other side. And you can see that they pretty much approximate each other. Okay. Now, smooth those out nice and neat. And we're going to glue those also onto the wing. So we bring back our wing, and we bring back our Dave's Flexament. Okay. Little dab here again. Now we can add the cheek. Okay. Put that aside, let that dry. And make sure we get the cheek here. And what you should do, and what Carrie did, was kind of a production line of style of tying, is that she made these wings up in advance by the dozens, and then all she had to do when she actually went to tie the fly was just pick up the matched wings, and away she went. Okay, there we go. We'll set those aside to dry a little bit. Oops, one came apart. Let's try that one more time. There we go. And again, safety here. Put the cover back on. You don't want to be breathing this stuff too much. Now we're going to need the jungle cock to form the eyes. And we'll pick out a couple here that match. Those look pretty good. Ended up with an extra one we didn't need. There we go. We got two nice eyes right here, the same size. And we can pull back the fibers that we're not going to need. Cut those off. Looks nice. Do the same thing with this one. There's a couple of tricks you can use with jungle cock. Because it is so expensive, you can actually split these and use half if you want to be a little cheap on it, but in this case we're going to do it the correct way. Come back here and pick up the wing again, which is still a little bit wet, but that's alright. I'll lay that down. Get out the flexament again. But you know, it always happens. There we go. Yeah. Hold the wing. Now I'm going to use the dull side here. And we're going to actually use a fairly liberal amount of the flexament here. You don't want to, we're going to coat the entire back side of the little feather here. And then very carefully, trying to keep your fingers out of the glue, we're going to add that to the sides of the feather. And there we have one complete wing. And all the pieces, all the parts are glued together. Let's do that one more time. The other piece of jungle cot. Make sure you get the back side. Okay. We have the other side. Now you notice what this has done is this has created a very, very rugged, very sturdy front half for this fly. So what actually happens is, one theory is in the water, is this is very stiff, this first 1/3 of the fly. And this allows the back portion of the fly to actually have some flexibility and movement, so that it actually gives you that same effect that a real live smelt or a real live bait fish would have in the water. Okay, I'll lay that down for a second. Practice safety here. We'll put the cover back on. And now we'll begin to place the wings on the little fly. Make sure that's nice and dry. Okay. Notice the tips. We're trying to make this kind of more of a traditional fly here, so we've left quite a bit of excess out here in the back. In modern theory on streamer construction, you'll generally find that most tyers will cut off or leave the tips of the wings just about the same as the bend of the hook, or just slightly beyond the bend. The older fashioned tyers, they liked a lot of wing, and they left a pretty good portion of wing hanging out over the back of the fly. Now, again, modern tyers, more modern streamer tyers, when they're constructing a streamer, generally will tie the wing portions on the top of the hook. And what Carrie actually did was tie them pretty much on the side of the hook. So that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to position this so that the wings are actually going to be tied on the sides of the head of the hook. So you got to be very careful here when you tie them in place not to roll them over. So you really need kind of some nice loose wraps here, and then wrap down a little bit so that that's secured in place. Come back up. Now we're ready to glue the side that faces us in. Okay. We'll position that. Want those wings to match in the back, and they do. And we want the cheeks to match. Well, that's not too bad. So just kind of hold that in place. Don't want to muckle down too hard on your thread at this portion. You just want to get some nice loose loops. And once they're positioned, you have them secured a little bit, then you can start making wraps that are a little tighter. Smooth that out a little bit. There we go. Okay. Alright, now we can cut out the stem butts here from the feathers. those out of our way. Now we can go ahead and we can form the head of the fly. And we're looking for a kind of a teardrop shape here. Nice tapered head, nice smooth wraps. And there we go. It doesn't look too bad. Now, as you can see, we've pretty much got a completed fly here. And we're going to use the whip finisher to finish off our head. And this is the nice thing about using a whip finisher is you can get plenty of even wraps. So you've constructed yourself a very, very sturdy head. It's not going to come apart even if you didn't use glue. Now, of course, as everybody knows at this point, Carrie Stevens would have picked up some red thread and she would have wrapped in a band here of red. Now, a lot of the patent books will show the red band, and they'll make that an integral part of the patent. It's important to note that the red band was Carrie Stevens' trademark, and it really is kind of a violation of ethics here if you went out and put the red band on there. It was her trademark, and there's only one individual that really is authorized to use that band, and that is Wendell Fulkins of Tamworth, New Hampshire. And Mr. Fulkins bought out Carrie Stevens in the late 50s, and when he did, he bought the trademark. So Mr. Fulkins is really the only gentleman that is entitled to use that red band, and the rest of us will just have to do with a nice black head here. We got a little bit of loose fiber here, I don't like that. Just reach in there and trim that out. And we're ready to put some head cement on here. And get a nice even coat. Now the cement I'm using here is the thin variety, and it absorbs very well into the head. But what you want to do is, on a nice streamer fly, is you want to put on an additional coat of high gloss head cement, and that gives it that extra elegant finished look that a nice streamer should have. Okay. So what we've done here is we haven't done exactly the same thing that Carrie Stevens did in her fly tying, but we've come pretty close by using some modern materials, the Mylar, and we've used the Dave Flex cement here to glue the pieces together rather than nail polish. But we've come pretty close to tying what is generally considered to be the Rangeley style of tying. And I think it's well worth the extra effort to use the old-fashioned way of doing these.